Good morning. The Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation will come to order. This morning we're having a hearing on spectrum and national security, and appreciate the witnesses being here today. Today's hearing will focus on the interrelationship of these two critical factors, spectrum auction authority and national security, and getting a plan to move forward. Foreign adversaries access Americans' data is a real and growing concern, and we must act to shut the door to protect Americans. But we are seeing this conversation around applications and devices, and we need to consider the national security of communications networks themselves. So really appreciate our witnesses being here on that point. The network relies on spectrum, whether it's cell phones in our pockets, connected devices in our homes, critical defense systems in our military, radar, satellites for aviation, weather infrastructure spectrum, all essential components of a modern communication system. Spectrum is a finite resource, which means policymakers must ensure and manage it effectively to the benefits of all Americans. And last year, after 30 years of consensus that auctions were a key part of spectrum management, the FCC's spectrum authority expired for the first time. We want to renew that. We want to look at today and discuss the outer bands, the 12 and 37 and AWS, and what we can do to make sure spectrum is made available now, to continue to increase capacity, expand the opportunities for new technology and IoT, and leverage the opportunities for areas that aren't covered today to grow our economy of the future. We must also ensure that spectrum is managed, and our national security colleagues who have been in a very active debate with us over these issues, that we are expanding this capacity for innovation. The private sector and the defense sector both need to advance. They need to advance successfully, and the United States must be the leader in spectrum technology and security. We have seen firsthand the threats of our foreign adversaries that they pose to the domestic communication telenetwork. For example, the presence of unsecure equipment for Huawei and ZTE, and our key domestic military installations impacted our communities. Rural providers across the nation, including my home state, are having to replace unsecure equipment costing billions of dollars. And as development begins on next generation wireless networks, it's critical the United States take a unified approach and continue to have the best spectrum policies in the world. It's clear that spectrum policy has often been the subject of interagency disputes, and that too with the report that was published by NTIA and DoD on dynamic spectrum sharing moved the discussion to a new level, but more needs to be done. The domestic approach to spectrum management built on collaboration will allow the United States to continue to lead on the international front. The FCC, NTIA, and NASA, DoD, and others must work together to ensure that we continue to work openly and collectively. Spectrum management must also embrace innovation like O-RAN, and which we will hear more about today, which will allow telecom providers to use secure, competitive networks. And innovation must expand spectrum access with technologies like the dynamic spectrum sharing harness the opportunities. Other collective spectrum management and technology innovation, I believe we can create a true pipeline. That's what we really want to do. We want to get what we can get now, get it in place, and continue to grow the opportunities. A sustainable, responsible vision will allow us to move forward on both our private sector and our DoD missions. For this to happen, we must restore the FCC's auction authority, and our strategy should include approaches on unlicensed and licensed spectrum. Today's hearing is about the national security element of that, and clearly once we address that, hopefully we will get our colleagues to focus on how to make these priorities a reality and create that kind of pipeline that will allow us to deal with some of our necessary issues for us to grow this security for the future. So with that, I'll turn to the ranking member, Senator Cruz, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for convening this hearing about spectrum policy and national security. It couldn't come at a more critical time. Spectrum Auction Authority has been lapsed for more than a year. The Biden administration has no concrete plans for getting spectrum into the marketplace. And all the while, the mid-band spectrum gap between the United States and China continues to grow. This is a problem, not just for our nation's wireless companies and their consumers, but for our national security. For too long, our leaders have treated national security and wireless innovation as mutually exclusive. That's deeply short-sighted. If we want national security, we need wireless innovation. If we want American companies and trusted vendors to prevail against our adversaries, we need to lead on spectrum. Or to put it another way, if the United States does not dominate in next-generation wireless networks and technology, we will become dependent on our adversaries and compromise our national security. To remain the world leader on 5G and beyond, we need a true mid-band spectrum pipeline. That's why last week, in partnership with Senators Thune and Blackburn, I introduced the Spectrum Pipeline Act. This legislation is vital for the United States to stay ahead of our adversaries and to advance strong economic growth. It requires the administration to identify at least 2,500 megahertz of prime mid-band spectrum to be reallocated for commercial use and creates shot clocks for the FCC to expeditiously auction at least half of that amount for 5G and 6G. Importantly, this bill is focused on getting the policy right at the outset, rather than allocating our nation's spectrum policy to be dictated by where we should spend auction proceeds. And it incentivizes agencies to use their spectrum more efficiently. I've long believed that we need to change the incentive structure to help bring federal incumbents to the table. By removing a key obstacle in current law, our bill allows agencies to use spectrum proceeds to replace affected equipment with even better state-of-the-art equipment. This will create a win-win for consumers and federal agencies. Our bill also takes an all-of-the-above approach. In addition to the wide area, full-power spectrum that is critical to 5G dominance, it maintains our leadership in Wi-Fi, too. With its low barriers to entry and freedom from regulation, Wi-Fi is a quintessentially American success story, which is why the bill requires the FCC to make available at least 125 megahertz for the unlicensed services before any auction occurs. In the same vein, the bill requires the FCC to allocate more than 1,000 megahertz for licensed or unlicensed services. Speaking of an all-of-the-above approach, today, in partnership with Senator Rosen, I introduced the Satellite and Telecommunications Streamlining Act. We must promote American innovation on all fronts, and that includes maintaining U.S. leadership in next-generation satellite technologies. While I'm committed to innovative, tech-neutral policies, I'd urge my colleagues to be wary of rent-seeking attempts by incumbent operators to block competition. Fostering competition and lowering barriers to entry means less federal control of the airwaves and greater opportunities for economic growth. I implore my colleagues and stakeholders, do not fight to maintain the status quo. Similarly, I'm disappointed that the majority chose at the last minute to add testimony from one side of the telecom industry, but not the perspective of competitors. We should be allowing lawmakers to hear from all sides on this issue. We need to work together and develop a harmonized, clear position. And that's what the Spectrum Pipeline Act brings to the table. Unfortunately, the contrast between our bill and the Biden administration's dilatory, ambiguous approach couldn't be starker. Put simply, spectrum simply is not a priority for the Biden administration. We offer a concrete timeline for freeing up spectrum, while the administration's national spectrum strategy offers perpetual studies, bureaucratic dithering, and no action to free up a single megahertz. We offer certainty, while they second-guess decisions and unlawfully withhold legitimately obtained spectrum from regulated entities. We saw this most jarringly in the 2023 World Radio Communication Conference, when the U.S. delegation couldn't get its act together We were stuck playing defense as China led the world in promoting Huawei's control of foreign telecom networks. Or take FCC Chairwoman Rosenworcel's decision to hold T-Mobile's 2.5 gigahertz licenses hostage for more than a year. While I'm glad that Congress was able to step in and clean up the FCC's mess, her inaction will reverberate for years to come. In addition to depriving millions of consumers of 5G connectivity for more than a year, the chairwoman undermined confidence in the integrity of FCC auctions and spectrum property rights. We must reverse course. The Spectrum Pipeline Act provides certainty rather than ambiguity. It promotes competition, not barriers to entry. And most of all, it creates a strong, harmonized position that ensures America leads the world on wireless technology and doesn't fall behind our adversaries. I look forward to the hearings from today's witnesses and working with my colleagues so that we can finally get our country's spectrum policy back on track.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. We'll now turn to the witnesses, and we'll start with you, Dr. Ghosh. Thank you so much for being here. I love that you're an electrical engineer. We definitely need more women electrical engineers, so thank you so much for your leadership at Notre Dame.
Thank you very much. Good morning, and I'm happy to testify today. Thank you for the opportunity. As you said, I'm a professor of electrical engineering at the University of Notre Dame. I'm also the Policy Outreach Director for Spectrum X, which is the NSF-funded Center for Spectrum Innovation. I also took 2 leaves of absence to serve in government at the NSF and as the CTO of the FCC. I continue to be actively engaged with both industry and government in various capacities, and I hope to offer a balanced perspective. The opinions expressed in this testimony are my own and do not necessarily reflect the position of any of the institutions with which I'm affiliated. So spectrum policy that enhances U.S. national security is one that satisfies the current and growing future spectrum needs, not wants, of the commercial wireless sector, science, and mission-critical federal applications. The U.S. leads by using exclusively licensed, shared, and unlicensed mechanisms as appropriate, depending on the use case. Leadership in 5G and 6G, which is already under discussion, extends beyond just making more exclusively licensed spectrum available. 5G and 6G can also be deployed in shared and unlicensed bands, where they're more likely to serve innovative use cases beyond just mobile broadband. Our leadership and security depend on us developing those innovations before others do. Making spectrum easily available, for example, by using the unlicensed or shared license model, is crucial for this innovation to happen here. Verticals such as factory automation, remote oil field monitoring, precision agriculture, community networks to serve the underserved, and improved indoor coverage are just some of the emerging applications that are crucial for our economic and national security. However, these are not well served today by either cellular or Wi-Fi and are increasingly moving to the shared spectrum CBRS framework for affordable deployments. CBRS uses something called dynamic spectrum sharing, or DSS, which refers to 2 or more different types of users, for example, federal radar and cellular networks, overlapping their operations in frequency, time, and space, where one user is the incumbent and has priority. DSS may require systems to share information with each other, employ databases or sensing to ensure that the primary user can continue to operate in the band without harmful interference. It is becoming increasingly clear that DSS will be an integral component of all future systems requiring access to spectrum. This is true of the US and internationally. Spectrum is getting congested everywhere in the world, and the physics of propagation remain the same. The innovative 3-tier sharing adopted by the US and CBRS has demonstrated conclusively that spectrum can be shared successfully between mission-critical applications such as Navy radar and commercial applications. At the same time, access to the spectrum using General Authorized Access, or GAA, has allowed the innovations mentioned earlier to develop. However, DSS needs to be more scalable and truly dynamic to address the protection needs of different types of incumbents in other bands. Furthermore, 6G needs to be sharing native, that is, incorporate spectrum sharing mechanisms by design to coexist with incumbent service providers, as stated by the White House in its recent 6G statement. Advanced approaches for DSS that leverage technologies such as smart antennas need to be evaluated. Sensing, too, is a fundamental technology that enables DSS. However, the separate sensing network deployed for CBRS cannot protect incumbents that are geographically more distributed than Navy radars. We need to consider alternatives, such as cooperative distributed sensing approaches that perhaps leverage the dense footprint of base stations and devices themselves. Improved receivers and accurate definitions of harmful interference can also lead to better spectrum sharing, as described in FCC's recent policy statement. Long-term spectrum R&D is essential for the sustained development and testing of DSS approaches in real-world environments to prove their robustness in protecting incumbents in various bands. NTIA's all-of-government approach to the National Spectrum Strategy and Implementation Plan is a necessary first step. I urge this committee to consider ways that this long-term R&D into DSS can be adequately and sustainably funded in industry, academia, and government. Finally, all of this requires that the FCC's auction authority is restored. Even shared spectrum can be auctioned. Thank you for the opportunity to share my views, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you so much. We'll now turn to Ms. Brown. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I am sure you'll introduce yourself a little more detail, but thank you so much for your leadership at Wi-Fi Forward.
Thank you, Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Cruz, and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify today. I serve as Executive Director of Wi-Fi Forward and have over 30 years of experience helping foster U.S. leadership in Wi-Fi technologies. Thank you for holding this national security hearing that enables us to consider how Wi-Fi technologies play an important role in our national defense and safety. I will focus on just 3 dimensions of that topic. First, how the U.S. Wi-Fi industry has been battling Chinese interests that would obstruct Wi-Fi growth globally. Second, how Wi-Fi provides communications, resilience, and redundancy. Third, the hidden strength of Wi-Fi, its ability to coexist in the same set of spectrum frequencies used by others, including federal and military users, without causing harmful interference, thereby fueling economic growth and technology innovation without relocating federal systems. Wi-Fi has been in the center ring fighting against China's global spectrum priorities. The Chinese Communist Party has prioritized influencing spectrum allocation decisions worldwide, both to maximize Huawei and ZTE's global influence and power and to undercut U.S. leadership. In 2020, the FCC led the world to open the 6 gigahertz band for unlicensed Wi-Fi. But as countries moved to follow our lead, China advanced its own agenda, seeking to make 6 gigahertz a band for exclusive licensed mobile use in dozens of proceedings around the world. Late in 2023 at the World Radio Conference, China aggressively worked to dismantle the U.S.-led momentum for unlicensed spectrum, urging a global plan to advantage Chinese government-sponsored companies by allowing only exclusive licensed mobile networks in the upper half of the 6 gigahertz band. Thanks to U.S. leadership, China's attempts largely failed. Post-WRC, U.S. companies can and will continue to engage country by country to encourage harmonized unlicensed use, which benefits the U.S. That said, we already see that China has simply changed venues. Its vigorous campaign for Huawei and ZTE, positioned as a fight against Wi-Fi, continues. We therefore appreciate this committee's focus on how spectrum policy advances U.S. national security and economic interests, both at home and abroad. Second, Wi-Fi enables the public to reliably connect and communicate in places such as their homes, businesses, and schools. When a major cell phone carrier recently experienced a widespread network outage, it notably advised its customers to use Wi-Fi communications until cellular service could be restored. Consumers connected to Wi-Fi barely noticed any disruption and were able to access a number of Wi-Fi voice and messaging applications to communicate during the outage, all because Wi-Fi networks are ubiquitous where people live and work. And these Wi-Fi networks are resilient by design. due to the tremendous investments Wi-Fi providers and developers have made to keep pace with consumers' growing demands for the technology. In fact, the vast majority of data we consume each day is delivered via Wi-Fi. For at least one mobile provider, 87% of its customers' smartphone traffic is carried over Wi-Fi. Network outages also occur when natural disasters strike, making redundant Wi-Fi and other networks important to ensuring connectivity. For example, operators frequently open their Wi-Fi networks to any and all users in the wake of natural disasters, such as the recent wildfires in Maui and Hurricane Ida in 2021. Third and finally, the coexistence capabilities of Wi-Fi are a U.S. national security strength. Coexistence means more spectrum can be provided for commercial use without resource-consuming reallocation of federal systems that support critical national security missions, whether in the 5 gigahertz band for Wi-Fi or for CBRS in a band used by Navy radars. We have seen the U.S. government able to commercialize valuable spectrum resources and unleash economic growth and innovation without incurring exorbitant costs to displace and relocate critical federal incumbents like DoD, NASA, NOAA, among others. Wi-Fi technology is a bedrock of our nation's connectivity here at home and is pivotal to our national security and global competitiveness. Thank you for the opportunity to share this information with you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Brown. Mr. Johnson, it's a reappearance, right? You've been here before.
I've been here before as a staffer, never as a
Okay,
witness.
so, well, thank you so much for coming back. We
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Madam Chair, Senator Cruz, Senators, as a former Army officer, former Senate Intelligence Committee, and adjunct Senate Commerce Committee staffer, FCC and Commerce staffer, let me just say it is a distinct honor to be here in this room because this committee and this room, which is the birthplace of the NIST cybersecurity framework, have played such a crucial role in the bipartisan push for government-industry collaboration on tech security. Now we need to apply those principles to spectrum policy. This is critical to the security of the U.S. and our allies because future networks will be developed either by us or by autocracies, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. It's that simple, and our security as a market democracy is at stake. We need to leverage spectrum for our principles, dynamism, innovation, freedom, not surveillance, control, and oppression. So to secure our core national interests, we have to maximize all spectrum uses from weapons and defense systems to licensed and unlicensed commercial networks. This will be hard, but we're pretty good at technical achievements, particularly at the intersection of military and commercial capabilities. Spectrum availability is an optimization challenge, not a scarcity problem. Radio waves are a critical resource, so we can either argue about scarcity or we can work together to optimize. Our security depends on this choice. Spectrum allocation is a national security issue because supply chains derive from spectrum bands. That's one reason why we're spending billions of dollars to rip and replace Huawei and ZTE gear, because they were often the only suppliers of radios for the spectrum that some small carriers use. We can't let that happen again. But we're falling behind in two areas. First, global harmonization of spectrum bands creates global scale, and companies designing for large global market have significant advantages over those designing for a smaller market. The more that our spectrum bands are harmonized with allies in global markets, the more scale trusted suppliers have for secure equipment. We need the world's tech discourse to take place in our spectrum bands, the frequency languages that we speak, but we're in danger of giving away that position to China and its untrusted suppliers, particularly in licensed mid-band spectrum where China leads us by 2.5 times. For scale and power, China wants to design equipment that speaks the most common frequency language, so they're taking our role as the leader of globally harmonized spectrum. We're becoming a spectrum island largely outside harmonized bands. If this continues, U.S. technology will be a U.S.-only dialect with limited influence in global scale. Huawei and ZTE and others would gain advantages across critical use cases from 5G infrastructure to connected vehicles to advanced manufacturing. Rip and replace restrictions can be helpful, but they're costly and insufficient. We have to be able to compete with China at the same scale in the first place, and harmonized spectrum is indispensable to that. Second, capacity. We need enough spectrum capacity to innovate and manufacture. But today we're anemic in licensed wide area coverage, which will soon run out of capacity unless we act urgently. Local unlicensed connectivity like Wi-Fi in a home or office is like the capillaries of the wireless ecosystem, nourishing local applications and network functions. As Senator Cruz and Mary have both said, our wireless capillaries are robust and healthy. We have far more unlicensed spectrum than China or any other country, which is one of the reasons Wi-Fi is such a resounding American success story. But our arteries, the licensed wide area coverage providing mobile connectivity across our vast continent, are already near capacity with nothing coming in the spectrum pipeline. Here we've gone from world leader to drastically trailing China, and it's getting worse. Make no mistake, this is a national security crisis, and it's a platform for China to shape the world's networks for its own autocratic interests. And also, battlefields of the future will be shaped by commercial spectrum availability. For operational warfighting reasons, it's crucial that future network and tech, like AI, cyber operations, battlefield communications, are developed by us, not China. So in conclusion, we need to act urgently to optimize our spectrum use so that America can lead in all areas of the wireless environment. This begins with restoring the FCC's authority to auction spectrum. The lapse in this authority severely damages U.S. security every day it lasts. We need to restore auction authority so that spectrum studies become a pipeline for concrete advances in capacity and auctions for mid-band spectrum. This will benefit all parties. The only loser in a zero-sum game is U.S. national security. We need our best commercial and government engineers to find opportunities to optimize. So with that, I would love to take your questions and expand on these important points, but this is we have a moment we need to seize here.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Ms. Ronaldo, thank you for being here to talk about Open RAN and what advantages that would give the U.S. on technology. Thank you.
Well, wonderful. Thank you, dear Chairman Cantwell, Senator Cruz, and members of this committee. My name is Diane Ronaldo, and I'm the Executive Director of the Open RAN Policy Coalition. On behalf of the coalition, I'm grateful for this opportunity to discuss the transformational role of open and interoperable solutions, particularly as we navigate the implementation of 5G technology and prepare for 6G and beyond. My goal today is to paint a picture of American innovation, regained opportunity, and economic alternatives. But none of this could happen without the lifeblood of our industry, and that is spectrum. Put simply, we cannot deploy more Open RAN and reap its benefits unless we have a sufficient amount of licensed spectrum which powers the Gs and Open RAN. Right now, we do not, and this committee can play a central role in addressing that shortfall. Founded in 2020, the Open RAN Policy Coalition promotes policies to drive the adoption of Open RAN. Our coalition represents a diverse group of communication and technology companies unified under a common goal, dismantling technological and market barriers to cultivate a competitive, secure, and resilient wireless market. Since launching the coalition, Open RAN has seen tremendous growth with more than 100 global deployments, including the world's largest right here in the US with Dish Wireless. ORAN has achieved its initial goal of providing additional vendor choice for mobile operators. However, our story is far from complete and more work must be done. Today, most of the work from the coalition is focused on international efforts. As developing nations look to deploy 5G, Open RAN is a viable and desirable option, offering a cost-effective and adaptable solution. And while our education mission at the coalition is incredibly important to bring heightened awareness to international partners, coalition members are eager to benefit from deployments here in the US. Unfortunately, additional movement in the US has been handicapped due to the expiration of Spectrum Auction Authority. With no new bands in the pipeline for future deployments, Open RAN has limited opportunities to grow. Furthermore, the FCC's Rip and Replace program is stalled due to lack of funding. The passage of the Secure Equipment Act in 2021 deemed Huawei and ZTE a national security threat, yet it still litters our networks. Huawei continues to service U.S. network functions, including software updates in rural communities. If additional funding is not forthcoming, we must develop a plan B. Open RAN was a nascent concept when the FCC catalog was drafted 3 years ago. With the deployment of more than 100 networks around the world, Open RAN is now a viable option, and our nation's rural carriers deserve more choice. The coalition also continues to have productive conversations with the Department of Defense, specifically the Future G and 5G cross-functional teams offices. DoD's use of commercially viable and available products stimulates the ecosystem, while leveraging the best that industry has to offer. Most recently, the Naval Air Station at Whidbey Island issued a contract to build a standalone 5G network. This project includes several coalition members, including Dish Wireless, Cisco, JMA Wireless, and Intel. These partnerships build trust and are crucial to the security and resiliency of our DoD networks. Last December, the Wall Street Journal wrote an article that Huawei expects 9% growth, with their chairman claiming that they are back to business as usual. I know this article gave a lot of people heartburn. I am here today to tell you that we are your good news story. Coalition members over the past year, NVIDIA up 262%, AMD up 115%, Broadcom up 100%, Microsoft up 63%. Dish has deployed the world's largest global network covering 73% of Americans. AT&T has made a $14 billion investment in Open RAN. Newcomers JMA Wireless, Cohere Technologies, and DeepSig are paving the way on private networks, spectral efficiencies, and AI. There are 127 companies participating in the Open RAN ecosystem from 21 different countries. But continued success is not a given. I implore this committee to reauthorize Spectrum Authority that will give us the indispensable resource that we need to compete. The geopolitical battle for secure networks will not be won between governments, but through market forces. Give us the tools we need to win at 3GPP. We hold the strategic advantage. The wind is at our back. It's time to hit the gas and not the brake. Thank you so much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for being here. Dr. Furgot-Roth, am I saying that correctly? No. Tell me the pronunciation. Furgot-Roth. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your testimony, particularly this fine point about Huawei's global network sales that continue today and how that really is leading some countries to continue to have an espionage, hostile countries, if you will, or terrorist groups, a threat against us. So thank you for that in your testimony. Look forward to hearing the rest of it.
Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Cruz, members of the Senate Commerce Committee, thank you for inviting me here today. Today's hearing is about the relationship between federal spectrum policy and American national security. Some viewers view the two as a zero-sum game. I disagree. I see the two as complementary. Attending to national security concerns protects commercial interests in spectrum and robust commercial development of spectrum, promotes American national security. For much of the past century, America has been the global leader in enabling new and innovative wireless services. Communications lawyers and policy practitioners, such as those of us in this room, call this spectrum policy. Most Americans are unfamiliar with the concept. They simply know that their smartphones and other wireless devices work, and they trust that our government can keep us safe from new wireless military technologies, such as the types of drones that are currently being used in the Ukraine. Sadly, American leadership in wireless technologies is now challenged, not just from competitors abroad, but also from paralyzed domestic policy. The unthinkable has happened. The FCC's legal authority to hold auctions has lapsed. No new bands of federal spectrum to transfer to the commercial sector are to be found, and coordination between the various branches of government on spectrum policy is absent. The end result? American leadership in international spectrum coordination wanes. Our global competitors speed ahead. American consumers are left behind, and our nation's ability to be nimble in the midst of new forms of wireless warfare is potentially compromised. Let me tell you a secret. The greatest undeveloped natural resource in the world is spectrum. The country that harnesses it will control the 21st century. U.S. spectrum just a few decades, U.S. commercial spectrum just a few decades ago was worth about $10 billion. Today, it's worth more than $1 trillion. Decades from now, our children will look back and laugh at the wireless technology of 2024. Technology will advance with or without new legislation. But Congress cannot legislate technological change or economic growth, but Congress can make new technology and economic growth more likely by unleashing the extraordinary power of human resources, of the greatest scientists in the world, of the greatest engineers in the world, of the greatest entrepreneurs in the world, and of the American consumer. The Cold War was won with stronger personal liberty and with the unrivaled economic power of the United States. And that is likely to be one of the great national security advantages that we will have in the 21st century if we, in fact, can unleash economic growth. There are 4 key steps Congress can take. More spectrum is transferred from federal to non-federal users. Much, if not most, of that spectrum used is for different commercial applications, all of the above, but including particularly full-powered licensed applications, the most valuable form of spectrum today. Vital national security interests are not compromised, and substantial improvements in spectrum policy rights, spectrum property rights, allowing more flexible use, less costly contract and lease arrangements, and improved enforcement against interference. The Spectrum Pipeline Act of 2024 addresses the first 3 points. It is an excellent start. It would benefit American consumers enormously. They may not know what spectrum is or what policy is, but they will know when more competitors offer better and lower cost wireless services. The time to act is now. Be bold, be decisive, not just for today, but for the rest of the 21st century. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all the witnesses. I think you did a great job at setting the stage for the need, the urgent need for the United States to lead in what will be the communication technology of the future, and certainly laid out some of our immediate challenges as it relates to China. I wanted to start with you, Dr. Ghosh. You mentioned this. Well, everybody is on one note very crisply solve the rip and replace problem. So thank you for that. And we are trying. We definitely want to try to further our efforts there aggressively. And I think it's you, Mr. Johnson, who talked about, no, Ms. Ronaldo. I mean, I'm definitely in support of what I would call a technology NATO. You know, the countries that you mentioned, Australia, Japan, India, the United States, working collectively on setting the standard for technology. You know, you can't have government backdoors, you can't have these kinds of violations. And if we say to the rest of the world community, these are the standards by which you buy technology, I think that would be very helpful today. So definitely supportive. But this notion of continued R&D, listen, we all wish we could have moved forward a year ago, but not all our colleagues were on board with that, and they were successful at convincing some not to move forward. But your notion of continued R&D investment, how do we achieve that? How do we achieve what you're talking about as it relates to really catapulting the U.S. into a continued leadership position here?
Thank you for that question. So the National Science Foundation is the lead research agency for the country, and they've done a fabulous job of funding most of the R&D that has happened. In the recent past, we have had other agencies like NTIA also come in with research funding to help grow this ecosystem of spectrum research, as well as things like ORAN. I really think when we look at advancing R&D, it shouldn't be off in a silo by itself. The better we integrate academia with industry, with government, to tackle the really important problems facing us today in this world of communications, the more effect that research funding will have. The Spectrum X, the research center that I'm a part of, which is led by the University of Notre Dame, is an excellent example of one way that we can go about getting this research funding out. It's a nationwide center. It has about 47 and growing number of universities. It's a way to educate the next generation, the workforce needs. We've heard from a lot of the agencies that the Spectrum workforce is aging, and we need the next generation to be educated in all of the various aspects, starting from the engineering and technical to the policy aspects.
And what do you do, because I want to ask Mr. Johnson a question so quickly, what do you do about the national security element? Do we figure out how to get more collaborative dialogue with people who have national security clearances? How do we solve that problem?
I think that, I have a security clearance. A lot of academics in Notre Dame do. We are involved in, DARPA projects, DoD projects. I think getting those connections done better would definitely help. Take what's happening in the research labs and getting them into the hands of the military, of the science agencies, of even commercial industry.
Mr. Johnson, your artery analogy is so apt. So what is it that you think that we need to do now that would help unleash that, even though we've had this report on dynamic spectrum sharing? Is there some artery unclogging that we could do today?
Absolutely, and the great thing is that I think all senators and representatives, all of the leaders of the Article 1 branch, know that we need a pipeline, and that it needs to be concrete. It needs to provide a pipeline of additional commercial spectrum, with the screaming need being the wide area coverage, where we're 2.5 times behind China.
And how important is that to get started now?
Absolutely crucial. Every day we're falling behind. So
Thank you.
we need a statute to make that happen.
Thank you. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Johnson, let's follow up on what you were just saying. You stated in your testimony that, quote, we are in danger of falling far behind China in mid-band licensed spectrum that can support wide area coverage. I very much agree. And I'm worried that this gap will have repercussions beyond 5G and 6G and will harm our leadership in the industries built on top of wireless networks, from advanced manufacturing to AI to next-generation app development. Mr. Johnson, in your judgment, why is legislation like the Spectrum Pipeline Act, with defined timelines for auctions, so critical to preventing our adversaries from overtaking U.S. wireless leadership?
Thank you, Senator. We have a national spectrum strategy. We have an implementation plan. We have studies. What we need is a pipeline. All of those things lead to a pipeline, but we can't get to a pipeline without a statute. So we need a statute that gives the FCC the authority that it had for 30 years until a year ago, and so that we can have a new pipeline, particularly for where we're so far behind in the wide area coverage licensed mid-band.
And expand on that for a moment. Why is licensed wide area full power coverage such a critical part of America's spectrum pipeline?
I'd say for two reasons. One negative. One is it's the only part of our ecosystem where we're behind. We have the best weapons and defense systems in the world. As Mary articulated, we have the best unlicensed and Wi-Fi capabilities in the world. We presently have the best network infrastructure in the world, but we're in danger of falling behind. And it's that network infrastructure that will be a crucial component of the future 5G infrastructure. That's what's built by Huawei and ZTE and others. So we have to secure that, as is evidenced by the rip and replace need. So we have to secure the infrastructure, and that's where the arteries, so to speak, come into play.
Thank you. Dr. Furchtgott Roth, you're a well-respected economist and a former FCC commissioner. I have to say I'm concerned by your assessment of the paralyzed state of our domestic spectrum policy. Do we need more studies and deliberation, or do we need real action to restore our wireless leadership?
Senator, we need action. We don't need more studies. We don't need more committees or bureaucracies. We need action.
And speaking as an economist, how important are strong property rights in promoting an efficient spectrum marketplace? If licenses are shared, either with federal users or among commercial users, how would that limit the ability of licenses to maximize their spectrum resources?
Property rights are extraordinarily important for efficient markets and for economic growth. There can be property rights in all different types of spectrum and different usage arrangements, but we need to clarify those. And the nation that leads in defining better property rights in spectrum is the nation, I believe, that will dominate the 21st century.
Thank you. Ms. Ronaldo, you've stressed the importance of a spectrum pipeline to broaden the supply chain for next-generation wireless networks. Putting on your hat as the former acting head of NTIA, can pipeline legislation and incentives for agencies to move out of certain bands help to break the bureaucratic logjam in getting licensed spectrum into the marketplace?
Absolutely. I think that's the one thing that we've consistently seen across the board. Money is not a motivating factor for the agency, so we need to reimagine incentives that are going to allow them to move and upgrade their technologies.
And in your judgment, how will the Spectrum Pipeline Act of 2024 open the door for U.S. manufacturers like Mavenir, a homegrown Texas company, NVIDIA, and Broadcom, to compete against Huawei and ZTE and to encourage foreign companies to manufacture more equipment in the U.S., as Samsung has done recently in Texas?
Yeah, it might sound cliche, but first mover's advantage. And we've seen that already, especially in your backyard at Telecom Corridor in Dallas with Fujitsu, who moved their networking business here about 2 years ago.
And Ms. Brown, I also believe the United States needs to maintain its leadership in Wi-Fi, which is why the Spectrum Pipeline Act of 2024 requires the FCC to allocate at least 125 megahertz for unlicensed use and potentially up to 1,250 megahertz. How would the unlicensed allocation in the Spectrum Pipeline Act help us counter Huawei and ZTE's influence abroad?
Well, first of all, thank you for that part of your bill. That would be an extremely helpful addition to the unlicensed portfolio, particularly if we can position it contiguous to the existing 6 gigahertz band, for which there are already standards and for which we could ship equipment tomorrow. So that would be a tremendous show of American leadership as the world continues to look at this part of the spectrum. If we learned anything from the World Radio Conference, if we stick together as a country, we can get done what we need to get done. And that would be a great asset to the Wi-Fi community.
Thank you.
Senator Welch.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair and the ranking member, I want to thank you for this hearing, and I want to thank the witnesses too. I'm new to this committee, but this has been extremely informative, and I really appreciate getting the context and how urgent it is that we resolve these problems so that we do have the best situation in the world. I'm going to take my opportunity to talk about something a little bit different because it's so urgent, and that's the Affordable Connectivity Program. It's about to expire, and that's really literally at the other end of what we're discussing now. It's for lower-income folks around the country to be able to connect to the internet. And this Congress, bipartisan support, we've done an enormous amount, especially as a result of COVID, where there was a recognition that being on the internet, having access to that was really critical for the well-being of all of our families. Where folks couldn't go to school unless they had the internet. They couldn't get a doctor's appointment without the internet. And we've built out the internet, but it's no good if you can't afford to get on it. If you're that family who makes $15,000 a year, has 2 kids, and you're trying to figure out how you can pay your bills and afford food. So the Affordable Connectivity Program is $30 a month help to these families all around the country, millions. In Vermont, it's like 25,000 families. And it's expiring, and one of the big challenges we have, because there's broad support for the program, it affects all of our communities, whether we're in a red state or a blue state. And it's evidenced by the bipartisan support we have for the effort to do it. Ben Ray Lujan has been doing an immense amount of work on that, but we have many colleagues on this committee, Senators Vance and Rosen, Senator Kramer, have been very supportive. And one of the challenges is how we're going to pay. It's about $7 billion in order to keep that going. So, Madam Chair, I've mentioned this to you. I know others have, and I know there's enormous demands whenever there's any money that may be available. The spectrum auction is one of the sources that may possibly be able to allow us to continue this program. But it really, really is urgent. And along the way, as we're reconsidering how to do it and keep it going, if there's reforms that make it more efficient, deal with improvements. I know, Senator Capito, you've mentioned some concerns that you've had, and Senator Wicker, I know you have as well. Let's do them. You know, let's make it better. Let's make it more efficient. But the bottom line, I think, is that we really have to continue the Affordable Connectivity Program. Otherwise, folks who are really dependent on that $30 in order to maintain connectivity are going to fall off. And surveys have indicated they really will. And will they get back on? Probably not. So this is a real setback for kids, especially in rural America, and families in rural America that are absolutely the same as the rest of us. They need access to the internet just like folks in rural America needed access to electricity back in the 30s. And we made a decision that it was worth it socially for the benefit of our country to electrify America. We've made that same decision here, but we've got to keep it affordable. So, Madam Chair, thank you for your indulgence in letting me make my case to fund the Affordable Connectivity Program. Thank you. I yield
Well
back.
heard, well heard. Senator Wicker.
Thank you very much. Let's see, so much talent and brain power at the table. Where to start? Back a few years ago, we passed a bill called the Beat China to 5G Act. It led to the successful auction of 3.45 to 3.55 gigahertz band. This auction required DoD to compress its systems. Let's go to you, Mr. Johnson. You may have even been with us then. To compress its systems into the lower part of the 3 gigahertz band. Now, NTIA is studying whether we should do that again. Is this an option? Will compression work again as an option for DoD and other incumbent federal users? If not, what is the way forward there?
Thank you, Senator, and thanks for your leadership on that bill and on so many other these bipartisan initiatives. I think that's a great example because it shows we can do this. We are actually better than any.
Can we do it again?
We can do it, and we can do it again. And the better that we get at doing it, as Mr. Furchtgott-Roth and Manisha have said, the better we get at doing it, the stronger we will be, and the stronger we will be in the 21st century.
Okay, who disagrees with that? Ms. Brown?
I think when we look at new bands today, we need to evaluate them from 3 perspectives.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, let's see. I've only got a moment or two, but you fundamentally don't agree
Right.
with, and I think, Dr. Ghosh, you don't either. Okay, would you supplement your answers for the record so that I can proceed
We will.
on here? Let me ask you this, Dr. Furchtgott-Roth, about proposed Biden administration policies. Digital discrimination rules. Will that make it more costly for broadband providers to connect unserved and the underserved Americans that Senator Welch is concerned about?
Senator, it depends on how they're implemented, but there is a great risk that the rules will make it more costly for providers to provide broadband services to all Americans.
What might the rules contain that we need to avoid?
I wouldn't want to prejudge what the commission will come up with, but if they impose any requirements that lead to greater costs of service, those costs will be shared by all Americans.
And the Biden FCC predictably has begun laying the groundwork to reinstate 1930s regulations. What about that?
I assume you may be referring to network neutrality and
Yeah, I don't like net neutrality because I think it's a misnomer.
It sounds like a Swiss railway company to
Right,
me. But, yes, I don't like the term either. But I don't think Title II should apply to
How would that affect investment?
very negatively.
When the ox was in the ditch here in the United States during COVID, we didn't have this so-called net neutrality as compared to Europe. Europe kind of shut down, didn't they?
That's right.
And we didn't have it, and we didn't really have a problem, did we?
No, sir, we did not.
The talk is we did not distinguish ourselves as a country at the World Radio Communications Conference in December, and we kept relying on other countries and asking them what they thought. Have you heard that?
Yes, sir.
You agree with that?
Yes.
Well, does that give you concern?
I've been concerned about the stature of the United States internationally in international conferences and in standard-setting bodies for more than a decade now.
Okay, and then, we've talked about rip and replace and these Chinese companies, but Chinese equipment remains in the networks of small rural providers, and there's no auction authority. Is this a matter of concern?
Yes, sir, it is.
And is it just a matter of not funding the rip and replace?
No, it's all of the above. There's a lot of work to be done.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Wicker. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank all of you for being here today. Professor Ghosh, did I say your name correctly? Yes, thank you. West Virginia needs more, I'm from West Virginia, we need more connectivity. But to close that digital divide, I've been technology neutral because we have a lot of mountains. Not every technology works in our state. And fixed wireless has shown some promise. So how do you see the role of fixed wireless after future auctions playing out in the rural areas?
Thank you for that question. I think the rural connectivity is about more than just spectrum. It's about having deployments. So you can have all the spectrum in the world, but if base stations are not deployed, you're not going to get coverage. And there are, we've done a lot of work with rural areas in Illinois where we have the same problem, where farms are not connected. So I think we have to be more creative in getting rural and isolated communities connected. CBRS is actually proving to be a great alternative to doing that. It's shared spectrum. But if you have a satellite backhaul.
Could you say, what is that,
CBRS, that's the Citizens Broadband Radio Service.
Okay.
That is shared spectrum, 3.55 to 3.7 gigahertz. It's shared with Navy radar, but the U.S. has led in coming up with a system of sharing that's very effective.
Would that be affected by an auction?
It's already been auctioned, so that band is already available.
So that's already gone. Okay.
It's already available. There are 3 ways that you can get to it. You can either have bought licenses at the auction that happened in 2021, I believe, or you can also use it like an unlicensed, in an unlicensed mode called general authorized access, which gives you all of the benefits of having paid for auction. And the real benefits that you get with CBRS as compared to either Wi-Fi or cellular is it's in a frequency band that propagates very far, much further than Wi-Fi does. And in terms of cellular, you don't have to pay to access that spectrum. So this is working very well. Many communities, even in South Bend, we have a deployment where CBRS was deployed by the city of South Bend to serve its lower-income students. It's not an underserved area. There are other options. But, talking about the ACP and looking for ways to get it more affordable, CBRS is offering that option for communities to take control of their connectivity needs.
Okay. Mr. Brown, we have the National Radio Quiet Zone is in West Virginia, and we have half of that, but it restricts transmissions to allow for, so that it allows for advanced scientific research and other sensitive technology operates without interference. And we're a very remote part of our state. But where we're running into problems here is it also conflicts with the 911 service and the ability to deliver service. So when you have a conflict like that, how in those sensitive areas can we continue to work so that you do the innovation that you need to do on the in the quiet zone area, but you can still serve your citizens on the 911? Anybody have an answer for that?
That is a difficult question when you have quiet zones, and that requires a lot of technical analysis to look at, are there wireless signals that could be propagated at low power, at a low level, in order to deliver the 911 technology that you need while not interfering with the radio astronomy. Radio astronomy also has a number of bands available to it, and it may be that you have to ascertain which of those bands is going to be best if you are concerned about having 911 connectivity at that facility.
Okay,
It's an
thank you.
engineering problem, yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm thinking about the folks out in Pocahontas County where this is located. They're going to
Yes.
need some technical expertise. Obviously, the state can help, but this has been a chronic issue out there. So I'm going to ask just a general question. I don't have all that much time left, like 35 seconds. But if a regular citizen is sitting here listening about, we're going to auction spectrum, what does that mean to them? So who wants to take that? We'll give you to one person. Yes.
So I think when you bring additional spectrum online, it's going to improve the user's experience. What we've seen across the networks is that we're at capacity. And so if we're able to bring more spectrum, you're going to be able to get stronger, faster, more resilient signal.
So what I think of somebody who maybe is in an unserved and underserved area who's been promised, and hopefully through the IIJA we're going to be able to deliver this. I think what they hear is we're going to improve all of the things that have already been improved upon, and you're still going to be left behind.
No, that's absolutely. It's incumbent upon us to articulate how we can get more coverage out to our rural communities, and that's a big part of this as well, and exactly where the spectrum bands are coming into play, and then the carriers are able to build out in your area.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Rosen. Hold on a second. We have a sound issue with you.
Okay.
There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Oh, perfect. Well, I was just thanking you for holding this really important hearing because all of the spectrum issues, it really makes a huge difference. And last week, I was proud to lead 33 senators in calling on congressional leadership to fully fund both the FCC's Rip and Replace program and the Affordable Connectivity program. In 2020, Congress created the Rip and Replace program, which requires companies to remove untrusted network equipment. While critical to our national security, the program has only been funded at 40%. So this is forcing our small and our rural providers to eliminate coverage, absolutely just eliminate it across our networks. In Nevada, one company stated they're going to have to reduce service to about 26,000 square miles as a result. And this is cutting off wireless access and emergency services to Nevadans in rural areas. And likewise, the ACP program has been pivotal for helping close that digital divide, and nearly 9% of Nevadans use this benefit to lower their cost of internet bill each month. But without additional funding, this program is going to lapse at the end of April. So I recognize that reauthorizing the FCC's Spectrum Auction Authority opens up a lot of revenue, which could be used for funding these vital programs and others, and I remain committed to working across the aisle to find a path forward for both rip and replace and ACP to ensure that our networks remain secure and that Nevadans can get coverage. And so with rip and replace, we've seen the real-world impacts of failing to lead in innovation and provide meaningful, innovative alternatives for untrusted foreign equipment. The U.S. has made some progress in removing high-risk Chinese equipment like Huawei and ZTE, but we must lead the way. We have to also lead the way in offering alternatives. And so, Professor Gosch, how can U.S. spectrum policy contribute to growing an ecosystem that provides meaningful alternatives to untrusted network equipment manufacturers?
Thank you for that question. As I've said before, I think by having a well-thought-out, rounded spectrum policy that's not exclusively focused on exclusively licensed spectrum, but also looks at other ways of getting spectrum into the hands of people so they can manage their own connectivity better is absolutely crucial. So especially when we're looking at the spectrum congestion that we face, especially in the mid-bands, it is absolutely essential that we do this better than we are doing it now. Just having more spectrum does not equate to better connectivity if the actual infrastructure is not deployed.
Thank you, and I appreciate that, and I'm going to ask Mr. Johnson, if we don't have a clear and unified domestic spectrum policy, as you're hearing about spectrum congestion and somehow some of these things are being used, is there a risk that the U.S. becomes a spectrum island? And what does that mean for our national security if we don't have a good policy that addresses some of these issues going forward?
Thank you, Senator. I think what it means specifically, if the United States is a spectrum island, we and the global technology ecosystem will be surrounded by Chinese technology. So if we think Huawei and ZTE and TikTok and other Chinese national champions are a problem, and I certainly do, then if we're an island, we will be surrounded by that problem. And in that case, I don't think I'm concerned as a former Army officer that there are no weapons systems or defense systems that can secure our national interests in that setting.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to move now to talk about Open RAN, which is one of the ways that U.S. is leading by advancing a new communications framework through, like I said, Open RAN. After launching the first 5G Open RAN network in Las Vegas in 2021, Dish has expanded their network to over 70% of the country. And so I was very proud to support the CHIPS and Science Act, which included $1.5 billion for the Wireless Innovation Fund, which just announced funding for an Open RAN lab to talk about this new innovation, things we have to do to allow carriers to test their equipment on the Open RAN network. So Ms. Ronaldo, what more can Congress do to support the Open RAN model and other types of wireless innovation?
Thank you, Senator. There's so much that still can be done. Encourage NTIA to disperse the additional $1.4 billion that they have. It needs to go out in the next 2 to 3 years. International assistance programs haven't worked for the telecom industry. We need to take the tools that we have and make them work better for us. We are dealing with Chinese Communist Party market distortions around the world. So how can we take the XM Bank, the DFC, make it more usable for our industry? I would also say to the senators, as you travel and talk to your counterparts around the world, ask them where they are in the build, who they're using in their networks. I think the additional education and attention really does make a global difference. And then we've had a great working relationship with Congress, with the administration. So it's good to have everyone on the same page of this one, and has made a tremendous difference in the last 4 years in bringing Open RAN from just a concept to over 100 global deployments.
Well, thank you for that. I have some questions for the record. I know my time is up. I'm very interested in discussing the dynamic spectrum sharing, and we'll be submitting that for the record. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and also thanks to our ranking member for holding this hearing today. The defense of U.S. networks is critical as foreign threats grow, particularly those in China. For this reason, removing high-risk Chinese equipment from our communication networks should be paramount to this committee's work. Congress cannot simply watch as networks go dark. My bipartisan bill, the Defend Our Networks Act, would tackle this problem head-on. This program shortfall needs our attention, and it needs it now. To that end, I would like to enter into the record this letter from impacted carriers. Looking at our nation's management of spectrum, we all know that we must be efficient and innovative. This is true for federal agencies and for non-federal entities that use spectrum. Economically, we face a global race for leadership and technologies these airways fuel. But boosting spectrum efficiency cannot come at the cost of harming systems our Department of Defense depends on to keep this country safe. Vital missile defense radar systems operate in Alaska and in Hawaii, using the same key mid-band spectrum that many corporations seek to obtain. We cannot deter or defeat China if our radar systems cannot reliably detect, identify, and track an ICBM missile or other incoming threat. And while this committee often hears about China's ambitions to dominate certain global industries, we must not forget China's focus on expanding and modernizing their military forces. For example, the breathtaking expansion of their nuclear triad. It would be very reckless to sacrifice current and future military capabilities solely for economic gain, and we should not continue to see DoD only as the pot of spectrum gold at the end of the rainbow. I'm also a senior member on the Armed Services Committee. We are hearing today from our Indo-PACOM combatant commander, as well as our commander on the Korean Peninsula, both in classified and unclassified briefings. The information presented to SASC today only serves to reinforce my commitment to the duty, the first duty of Congress, and continuing to be sure our military has what it needs in regard to spectrum to protect this nation. The administration's new National Spectrum Strategy and Implementation Plan further highlight the disjointed communications on spectrum management. Throughout drafting, DoD's work and feedback were heavily omitted and outright rejected. The study that NTIA, our federal spectrum coordinator, co-led with DoD on critical lower 3 spectrum continues to be dismissed by this administration. That study still hasn't been released publicly to inform this discussion we are having. Senators King, Hirono, and I wrote a letter to the administration about these concerns over a month ago. We still haven't heard back, and I can't say that I'm surprised by that. Dr. Ghosh, DoD has stated that it would undermine our national defense if we displace its systems, especially those in the lower 3 band. We also know that spectrum sharing systems today use the same trusted 5G supply chain as exclusive spectrum systems, supporting the same supply chain. When dealing with DoD spectrum, can American innovations in spectrum sharing help resolve these intense fights over moving systems to clear bands?
Thank you very much for that question. Absolutely, and we have proof of that. CBRS is already doing that. There has been, as far as I'm aware, no documented evidence of interference to any Navy radar from commercial deployments in CBRS. The way we've done that in CBRS is to move away from the high-power exclusively licensing option and investigate low to medium power, perhaps indoors, sharing options. I will point out that even China has said that the 3.3 to 3.4 gigahertz band is for shared indoor use. I don't know whether they have military operations in that band, but clearly the rest of the world is also looking at different ways of using spectrum so that you can layer on more than one application in the same band. So dynamic spectrum sharing at low, medium, perhaps indoor power is a great way to protect the DoD, not having them leave the band, but add on other services on top of it.
In your briefings, have you had detailed explanations from DoD on current systems that many are classified, on current systems and the effect it would have on them? Radars,
Yep.
F-35s?
Yes, I was actually participated in the PATH SS effort between NTI and DoD, the one that you just referred to. I think that collaboration worked exceedingly well. There was academia in the room, there was industry, there were government agencies. I agree with you. It'd be nice to see the public report come out of the work that went into doing that. But we are continuing some of those efforts within academia. We are still engaged in looking at how 5G can coexist at different power levels with DoD operations.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Peters is next, and then Senator Blackburn. I've seen her on the remote a couple of times, but she would be after that. So if you're ready.
I'm ready.
If not, we'll go to Senator Hickenlooper. But
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Ms. Ghosh, one use of spectrum that I have long advocated for is transportation safety technology like cellular vehicle to everything technology. This type of technology helps connect vehicles to each other, to other road users, as well as infrastructure. It dramatically can improve safety and efficiency, as you well know. Applications include collision avoidance, school bus safety, first responder, signal priority, and the list goes on. My question for you is, as you know, these technologies are reserved in the 5.9 gigahertz band, and in 2020, the FCC acted to reduce the amount of spectrum available in that band for these applications. So from your perspective, what are the particular challenges or opportunities created by reserving 30 megahertz of spectrum for the transportation safety technologies? And secondly, what are the strategies we can use to ensure that we're maximizing safety applications in this band in the future?
Thank you for that question. I was at the FCC actually when that decision to remove 30 megahertz was made. So I think one of the things I would like to point out is that the ITS band had been allocated for 20 years. Prior to 2020, it was in 1999, I think that band was allocated for ITS, and there's been very little deployments. So I think now that we have CV2X, which is a newer way to do this, I agree that it would be good to have 75, but 30 is also a sizable portion of spectrum. I think what we need to have is deployments. The thing with vehicular communications is that you need a critical mass of vehicles out there. If I'm the only car on the highway that has this technology, I have nobody to talk to. So we need the infrastructure. If you're going to do vehicle to infrastructure, we need a critical mass of vehicles so you can do vehicle to vehicle. And that needs to get started as soon as possible. I think 20 years has been a long wait for this technology to really come into play.
But the question is, it is coming into play. So it is, you're seeing, especially as we move towards autonomous vehicles, it's a big aspect of that. So the technology may not have been developed for a while, but then right when we're actually developing it all, and when we know there are going to be major increases for safety, to try to take spectrum away so someone can download a movie quicker, I think I'd rather save people's lives than automobiles. And let's think about where that technology is today and where it's going, not think about, well, they didn't develop this 20 years ago. They didn't say that about airplanes. Hey, we reserve things for airplanes, but they weren't developed till the Wright brothers did it. You know, that's not the way to look at it. So I would hope we're looking at the future.
I agree, and I think I would be, there are concerns about interference from adjacent bands into CV2X, and all of those are concerns that we need to study more.
Right, absolutely to do that, but hopefully safety is always number one, not quicker videos. Mr. Johnson, I have appreciated the testimony that you gave today on the threat posed to our national security by Chinese telecommunications firms like Huawei and ZTE. And I agree that we must actively address this threat, which is why I strongly support shortfalls in the, to fund those shortfalls in the RIP and replace funds that rural broadband needs for these networks. Northern Michigan University, for example, provides broadband service to over 16,000 household. It's in Michigan's Upper Peninsula and has been facing a $27 million shortfall in rip and replace of their Huawei system since 2021. This is not just a national security issue, it's a rural broadband access issue, which is critical. So if you could speak to coverage and quality issues that rural broadband networks face that are reliant on Huawei and ZTE equipment, and if they don't receive the funding and are unable to upgrade, what is that going to mean for them?
Thank you, Senator. And I speak as a rural American citizen, live in rural Northeast Georgia. So it's personal to me and my family. This is the easy part, frankly, that we know where the gear is, we know how much it costs, and we just need to get rid of it. And I think that the harder part is if we let China lead on spectrum, all of the connected vehicles and autonomous vehicles and essentially any mobile technology that we have has the danger of being produced by China for autocratic means. And that will be something that we can't rip and replace. So this part is the easy part, and we have to do it. Those 16,000 people need to be able to make 911 calls.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Blackburn.
Thank each of you for being there this morning. Ms. Ronaldo, I want to come to you first. Spectrum is a scarce resource, and I appreciate that y'all are here talking about it this morning. I have long called for an inventory of spectrum assets that the federal government is holding. And I know when you were the acting NTIA administrator that you asked the federal agencies to review their frequency assignments and to quantify their spectrum utilization. And the goal was to ultimately estimate the extent to which each system used its assigned spectrum, make certain we didn't have spectrum squatting. So talk a little bit about how these assessments might help us as we look to more efficiently use our scarce spectrum resources, particularly as we are drafting spectrum pipeline legislation.
Thank you, Senator. Yes, it's so incredibly important to have a better understanding of who's doing what and where. And while I sent that in 2019, it needs to be done every couple of years. I think as part of us moving forward, we need to ensure that we have a process in place. And so things like this are done periodically without being directed to do so.
Great. One of the things that I have put some work in, Senator Warner and I introduced the Promoting U.S. Leadership in Standards Act, which would improve our nation's ability to advance its agenda at meetings, particularly meetings around emerging technologies, and would help bolster our leadership on the global stage. And I was disappointed with how we were represented at the World Radio Conference and the lack of leadership that was there in the U.S. at the last minute was forced to change personnel, wrestle with domestic policy disputes, and proceed with unclear objectives. And other countries, especially our adversaries, do not conduct themselves in this way. They're organized and they dominate on the world stage as a result. Countries like China, Iran, Russia are leading these discussions. Huawei had a significant presence at WRC 23, and they were one of the loudest voices represented there. So, Mr. Johnson, you said in your written testimony that the U.S. is and I'm quoting you, mid-band licensed spectrum island that operates largely outside of core globally harmonized spectrum bands. So what impact does this have on U.S. leadership in mid-band spectrum, and how does it affect our economic and our security interest?
Thank you, Senator. And I think our economic and security interests are identical. They're completely aligned. What it does is it undercuts the longstanding U.S. leadership that has characterized almost all of post-World War II history, including in spectrum. And we're in danger of losing it. And China knows they have a plan, they have a strategy, a plan, and they're taking action. And that's why I think the number I heard was there were 45 Huawei representatives in Dubai, not to mention all the other China-based representatives. They know where the future lies, and they know where they're ahead and we're behind. And we need to if we just let this happen, we'll be ceding the future of the technology supply chain to China, which will have drastic impacts.
Thank you for that. Mr. Fargut Roth, you want to weigh in on this? What do you see as the impact? How do we fix it?
Senator, your bill with Senator Warner is very important. These international fora, both through the ITU and through standard-setting bodies, are extraordinarily important. And you're right. The United States, frankly, for many years has not taken these as seriously as we should. In part, it is that decades ago, certainly in 1980s and 1990s, the United States was offered a great deal of deference because we were the undisputed world leader in a lot of these technologies. We no longer are. We don't get the deference, and we need to restore America to a position of strength in which other countries look to us for leadership.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Klobuchar.
Very good. Thank you very much, Senator Cantwell, Chair, and thank you for allowing some of us to have this capability to do this by video as about 100 things this morning, so I appreciate an estimated 240 million calls, as you all know, are made to 911 centers annually, yet there's still outdated technology for 911 centers. For example, in many places, it doesn't even still support text messages, which is pretty outrageous in this day and age. As co-chair of the Senate Generation 911 Caucus, Next Generation Caucus, I lead legislation with Senator Cortez Masto to modernize our 911 systems. Professor Ghosh, do you support using spectrum auction proceeds to modernize our 911 infrastructure?
Yes, absolutely. The 911 infrastructure needs all the financial support it can get.
And I want to enter in the record a letter to Chair Cantwell and Ranking Member Cruz from a number of organizations supporting public safety that support this position. If I could, Chairman.
Without objection.
Thank you. Let me continue on this vein, Professor Ghosh, about how to use technology in a better way so it serves everyone. One of those issues is bringing broadband to every corner of the state. And we know to do that and of the country, you need to get accurate maps, not just to know where the coverage is still needed, but to make sure that no one's overstating their coverage. I led an effort back in 2020 to improve the accuracy of the FCC's broadband availability maps. We've seen some improvements, but there's more to do. Professor, I understand you worked on broadband mapping during your time at the FCC and led a pilot project to retrofit Postal Service vehicles and garbage trucks to door-to-door and test maps, which I love the idea of actually testing what we see on paper or on the internet. How effective have these pilots been?
Thank you very much. That was one of the most fun things I've done at the FCC. So while at the FCC, we did the postal vehicles, and then when I came to the University of Notre Dame, we did the same thing with garbage trucks. This is a very easy, actually, way of collecting network coverage information without going out of your way to do drive tests like a lot of operators do. We are doing a very similar thing within Spectrum X, our center, which we call Broadband Map Us. It's a project where we've involved students and we've given them phones that they then go out and collect data for on their phones. So today we have very easy ways to collect signal strength information from our phones. And they're doing very innovative things like mapping, sort of correlating the network coverage with the socioeconomics of the places they're collecting the data in. So I
Okay,
think there are many
if I-
inventive ways we can do this.
Good, very good. And I just think just having that accountability and knowing that we're checking on things can lead to more accurate outcomes, because no one wants to be found that they actually weren't telling the truth of the coverage. Mr. Johnson, you note in your testimony, changing topics, that foreign companies were the only suppliers that built radios for the spectrum bands where many small carriers operate. Can you discuss how coordinating spectrum use with our allies can help ensure carriers have competitive options when buying equipment?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, ma'am. The basic answer is that if we have harmonized spectrum bands, we have global scale, and that means that our trusted suppliers have a scaled market to design to and to sell to. Often, I think in most cases in this arena, design and development start with the spectrum band. It goes all the way down to the chips and the software. So it's literally the beginning of the technology development. Certainly Huawei and ZTE know that, which is, I think, probably why they designed those radios for those sort of bespoke, smaller spectrum bands.
Okay. Along the lines of competition, Ms. Ronaldo, prior to Open RAN, there were only a handful of telecommunications equipment vendors serving wireless network operators. Can you explain how this Open RAN vendors are bringing more competition to the market and helping lower costs for network deployment?
Yeah, so there are 127 companies participating from 21 different countries around the world. And what we have seen, that why Open RAN has been so successful, is that because we give companies and countries something to run to as opposed to run away from. When I was at NTI,
Well said.
I'm sorry?
I said well said.
Thank you. So just when I was at NTIA and would go around the world, people didn't want to go to Huawei, but they just didn't see any alternatives. So I think that's why there's been such a huge interest in Open RAN, not only here in the U.S., but globally.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. Next is Senator Vance, if he's ready. If not, I'm sure Senator Lummis would take.
I appreciate it. Thanks to the chair for hosting this hearing. And I think, like a lot of my colleagues here, you know, I'm relatively new to the spectrum issue, and I'm just trying to understand everything. And you know, obviously, sort of one of the big debates in the spectrum question is sort of, well, you know, the DoD wants this mid-band spectrum. It's obviously very valuable, and you also have a lot of commercial users who want it too. And so I'm sort of mindful of Senator Cruz and Thune's efforts on this. But I maybe just want to ask each of you for kind of your perspective on this and how you think about the balancing of factors that we're thinking of. And you know, I'll just go down the line if I can, and you know, maybe try to answer relatively briefly because I'm just curious in everybody's sort of perspective on this. But like, you know, imagine you're a senator for a day, and you're trying to figure out how to balance the national security implications of mid-band spectrum with the commercial concerns. Like, how would you guys do it? And how do you think about sort of these trade-offs? That's a relatively open-ended question, but by design. So maybe we'll just start with, and I'm terrible, I'm going to butcher this name, but Dr. Fergat Roth.
That was very good, Senator.
Well, okay, great. It's the best thing I'll do all day.
I would, I think you hit the nail when you said balance, and I think there's a question of balance, and certainly want to take national security interests into, want to take those, balance those against the incredible commercial value of the spectrum. And I'd like to see a study that kind of sort of goes maybe 25 megahertz by 25 megahertz by 25 megahertz and sort of say, if you took off 25 megahertz, how much would that cost DoD? If you took off 50 megahertz, how much would that cost DoD? And come up with some numbers and figure it out from there.
Okay, that's helpful. Ms. Brown?
Thank you for the question. I think we have to now start evaluating federal spectrum from three perspectives. One, could it be compressed? Could federal spectrum be compressed, or could those systems be cleared? Two, could they be shared with commercial users, as we've done in CBRS, the very successful CBRS model? And three, should we consider putting unlicensed technologies in as an underlay, and could that be a successful model? Unless we have the information for all three, we can't make an informed decision.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Brown. Ms. Ghosh?
I think we should look at our needs, not in other countries. China is 4 times our population, and if they have more spectrum, it doesn't mean that we need more spectrum. We need to look at what our defense needs are, what our consumer needs are, and what our science needs are. We often forget that we need spectrum for things like weather satellites as well. And I agree with Mary's assessment. We should look at all options before we decide that one is the best.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Ronaldo?
I would say that none of us want to degrade the capabilities of our defense. I was at the House Intelligence Committee and I worked on these issues. I have a tremendous respect for what our armed services are doing. What we're discussing is there a possibility to move, and not only move, but to increase capabilities. And I think that's why it's so important to relook at how we incentivize the agencies. That could we give them increased technologies with funding from the Spectrum Relocation Fund. I also think we need to remove the personalities and the emotion from this conversation and have it be data-driven.
Just one quick follow-up on that. I mean, how much of the debate is a scientific debate about, what happens when you move 25 megahertz this direction or that direction, and how much of this is we understand the scientific implications, we're just sort of having a turf war over interest from there? Maybe, Mr. Johnson, I'll give you that one.
Thank you, Senator. And I'll answer this. A former Army logistics officer. I've spent my entire career at the intersection of national security and commercial security.
Sure.
And I think in this case, it's the same. These interests are the same. And so I would borrow a lot of the ideas that have been said by my 4 fellow panelists, and just add that I would shift the whole posture. I actually don't think it's about trade-offs. I think it's about optimizing. And if we look at how do we make the best use of the available spectrum, that's a different discussion from who's taking from whom. If we do that the best in the world, which we can and we have, I think we can do it better. But this mix that Mary talked about and some of the advances that Harold and Monisha have discussed, we can lead the world, and it will benefit our defense systems, and it will benefit our commercial security, all of which benefits U.S. national security.
Sure. And I'm sure my staff and I will follow up just to try to better understand some of these answers in detail. But I appreciate your time and appreciate you being here today. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Vance. Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to all of you for being here today. I think this is almost like the 1927 Yankees. I'm not sure we've had this much horsepower at one table since I've been here. There's a lot of talk these days about TikTok and ByteDance, but I want to come back again to the issues around rip and replace, and I think that it's worth discussing from all perspectives. You go back to 2020 when Congress authorized FCC to financially reimburse rural wireless carriers for the costs of ripping and replacing network equipment that had been made by, Huawei and other companies that posed national security threat. The program currently faces a $3 billion funding shortfall, as we've heard. Small carriers are bearing the financial burden of repairing their networks and disposing of their equipment without being reimbursed, as was promised. In Colorado, this is a big risk. Some reports indicate a wireless carrier in Colorado could soon be forced to reduce its coverage by 70% without full reimbursement from the program. That's nearly 13,000 square miles. Simply put, small wireless carriers across the country serving rural communities are at risk of shutting down parts of their network in places where they are, in many cases, most needed. And Colorado is not alone. We have our little heat map that demonstrate that the lack of funding is affecting states across the country. It's not just a threat to national security, it's a threat to our goal of bridging the digital divide, maintaining access to telehealth and public safety. So I guess I'd ask each of you, we can just go down and start with Dr. Ghosh. Do you believe closing the gap in rip and replace funding is critical to both national security and public interest?
Yes.
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 Really nothing better than rhetorical questions where you're sort of guiding. Switching a little bit back to Open RAN, which I think, again, is a fascinating but critical issue. Ms. Ronaldo, thank you for your testimony today and all your work on this. Open radio access networks really can revolutionize how we build communications networks, how successfully we can interoperate. Is that a real word?
Exactly.
Make them more interoperable. And it allows us to build networks with components that are from trusted U.S. vendors, not ZTE, not Huawei, not any of the companies from our rivals. In Colorado, we have Dish. They've taken the lead and developed the first, I think, the largest standalone Open RAN 5G wireless network, and they're launching service now across the country. Ms. Ronaldo, how can we accelerate Open RAN adoption and lower barriers to the entry of new vendors in the Open RAN ecosystem?
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for your leadership at ITS. Absolutely, Dish has been a leader on Open RAN, and I think how we get additional operators to participate in the Open RAN ecosystem is spectrum auction authority. The more spectrum that we can auction, the more bands we bring online, the more opportunities for Open RAN. I would also say that standards is such a critical part of this conversation. We need to incentivize companies to go to standards. We need to ensure that we are working beforehand, that we have, again, right, this talk about the chaos, that we have a good unified position as we enter in these standards bodies. So I would also say that's incredibly important. And then just NTIA, encourage them to get the additional funding out the door as soon as possible. If we're going to bring Open RAN to scale, we need that money to be out in the next 2 to 3 years.
Absolutely. And I think that sense of urgency is something that we haven't seen. We haven't seen the level of urgency that I think we would all agree we need. Dr. Ghosh, let me ask you, you know, we lead the world in private R&D, investments in terms of telecommunications. We get top flight researchers from around the world, also entrepreneurs from around the world that come here to set up businesses and do their research. But we actually have all that talent, right here already in many cases. And American companies are developing these exciting new, the dynamic spectrum sharing abilities to maximize our range that we have. I think it should be another priority to make efficient use of this potential. And these efficiency gains could be critical in reducing energy consumption, meeting climate goals. We go down the list. So how can this DSS, this dynamic sharing, dynamic spectrum sharing, help us achieve more energy efficient networks?
Thank you for that. I think there are two ways that DSS can really help in reducing the footprint of ICT, as it's called, which is growing. So 5G was supposed to be more energy efficient than 4G, and it turns out that the total energy expenditure of 5G is actually growing. One of the key ways that DSS, dynamic spectrum sharing, can help is by sharing spectrum with the federal users, but at a much lower power. So to get into this building from a base station outside, you've got to overcome about 20 dB, which is 100 times of signal loss. If instead of that, you could have a CBRS kind of shared network deployed in the building that your phone connected to, you would have just reduced the amount of power you transmit. So I think, keeping that goal, it's a goal of a lot of the next generation standardization activities, and I hope to see that we will make progress on that.
Great. And I feel I'm out of time, but Ms. Brown and Mr. Johnson, I will submit my questions for you into the record, but appreciate all of you taking the time to come and testify.
Senator Thune.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me just start by saying that spectrum decisions are often driven by the amount of proceeds that a particular bill might raise rather than policy, which concerns me. When I authored Mobile Now and in working with Ranking Member Cruz on this Spectrum Pipeline Act of 2024, I've always focused on getting the policy right, not on how much money the bill would raise. And so I would just ask each of the panelists, and be simple yes or no, should spectrum policy be driven by the dollar sign certain legislation could raise? Dr. Ghosh.
No, it should be for the user capabilities.
No.
No for security.
Right.
No.
No, all the receipts should go to the U.S. Treasury.
So, Mr. Furgot-Roth, could you elaborate on the specific harms that allowing spending priorities to dictate spectrum policy?
Yes, Senator. The important thing about spectrum policy that we've been discussing today is to get spectrum from the federal government to the private sector, or to protect spectrum that's in the federal user. But the auctions are all about getting spectrum to commercial users as quickly and expeditiously as possible. Spectrum policy shouldn't be focused on how much we can get to some specific activity. I think Congress does that through the Appropriations Committee, that should be the way it operates. If you think about it, today we have approaching a $36 trillion deficit. If you could find $100 billion a day, $100 billion a day, you could not pay off the federal debt in a year. We just have this massive debt. How are we going to close it?
Well, let me just, that's a subject that I'm interested in, but probably not for this conversation. But in my view, the United States need to make more mid-band spectrum available both for commercial licensed and unlicensed uses to maintain our global competitiveness. It's clear to me that the Biden administration is not taking our mid-band spectrum deficit seriously, while China and our rivals are freeing up this crucial spectrum. The President's national spectrum strategy commits to freeing up 0 megahertz of spectrum, not a single megahertz. Mr. Furgot-Roth, is there any urgency that you see from this administration to make more spectrum available for commercial use? And then just as a follow-up to that, how important is it then for Congress to act and provide a real spectrum implementation plan?
Senator, I think the two can work together. I think there's some positive elements in the Biden administration spectrum policy, but the timelines are much too broad. They need to be tightened up, and there needs to be some identification of spectrum that's going to be in the pipeline by a date certain. And that's why I think that the bill you've co-sponsored on the Spectrum Pipeline Act of 2024 is an excellent bill and moves everything in the right direction.
Ms. Brown, I was supportive of and pushed the PI FCC to make the 6 gigahertz band available for unlicensed use. This order fulfilled an important mandate of the Mobile Now Act, which recognized the role both licensed and unlicensed spectrum play in the communications landscape. During the most recent World Radio Communications Conferences, it was reported that China and Huawei were working against the United States to reverse the progress made on 6 gigahertz. Could you elaborate on how this played out and how moving forward, or I should say, and moving forward, what steps should the United States take to ensure we're leading the world in wireless advancements?
Well, thank you, and thank you for all your support of unlicensed through the years, including the most recent Spectrum Pipeline Act and your discussion of advanced Wi-Fi. China has been opposing U.S. industry efforts to open the upper 6 gigahertz band from the day the FCC made its decision in April 2020. We have encountered Huawei and Chinese interest in every country in every proceeding that has looked at the 6 gigahertz case. That culminated in November and December of this past year, WRC, where China attempted a spectrum grab. They tried to use the WRC decision-making process to basically tell the world, you will not use the upper part of the 6 gigahertz band for unlicensed. You will not even have that discussion. You will only use it for exclusive licensed mobile use. That is not what happened, thanks to U.S. leadership at the conference. We ended up with a resolution whereby the countries of the world could decide for themselves, based on their own strategic objectives, what they wanted to do with the upper 6 gigahertz band. And that means that U.S. industry can continue to go country by country to try to influence national regulation and come up with a harmonized approach to the 6 gigahertz band. Going forward, we're going to need help from the administration, and we work very closely with the trade organizations within the USG to try to use those levers to help us as we go around the world.
Well, thank you all very much, and I would just argue, Madam Chair, that it's time to reload the pipeline, and I think you all have testified to that today, how important that is on so many levels. So I hope we can get moving on legislation that would bring some certainty and clarity to the issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Thune. Senator Lummis.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I want to thank my colleague from Colorado who has allowed me to use his map to illustrate the issue of rip and replace, which
Senator Lummis, I've wanted collaboration so much, and I'm glad we have it.
You definitely have it on rip and replace. This is a huge problem for the 3 states in brown, Nebraska, Wyoming, and Colorado, because the Congress only provided enough money to cover 40% of the costs of eliminating the Chinese-made equipment from their networks. And the 3 states that are the most at risk are the 3 in brown, including my own. So one wireless provider in my state is deciding now what parts of their network they'll need to shut down soon. I mean really soon, because they don't have the funds to replace the equipment that Congress ordered them to remove. So this provider covers 122,000 square miles of land. It contains 450 healthcare facilities, 1,900 schools, 40 military installations, and a significant part of that includes segments of Interstate 80. Now, I-80 runs, of course, from coast to coast. It runs through central Nebraska and southern Wyoming. The area of coverage that is going to get lost is this area of coverage. And it covers a large part of Interstate 80. So all of those truckers, and it's a huge commercial trucking route across our country, and they're going to lose coverage. And so if we have spectrum, great, but if there's nobody to access the spectrum on the ground, what good is it? So for Wyoming and, of course, my colleagues in Nebraska and Colorado, this is a huge risk, and time's running out. They're going to shrink their coverage because of the huge geographic area that they need to coverage. So I definitely share the goal of identifying additional spectrum for the rollout of 5G and 6G, but truly it won't be much use if no wireless providers are around to use it, because rip and replace was inadequately funded. So I want to make an urgent call, along with my colleagues from Nebraska, Wyoming, and a couple other states, even the ones in the more orangey, the deeper orange, are in tremendous risk of losing coverage. So, and we have funding sources. There's 2 bills that have funding sources. One is Senator Fisher's from Nebraska, and she's using extra COVID monies. Senator Daines has another source of funding to fully pay for this rip and replace. But the fact that it hasn't been done, and it has put these providers at a place where they're just going to have to cut coverage. And it's been a long time since you could drive down Interstate 80 and just all of a sudden dropped the call for extended mileage before you can pick it back up. And this is critical because our blizzards are epic, and trucks are left by the roadside in a moment's notice when a blizzard hits. And this is dangerous to allow rip and replace to be underfunded. I urgently make the pitch to fund rip and replace, not only for my state, but every other state that did not benefit from the funding that was inadequately provided for rip and replace. So, off my soapbox for a few minutes, I would like to ask a question about Open RAN. Ms. Rinaldo. Could you tell me how these advancements in Open RAN contribute to making connectivity more affordable and accessible for rural communities?
Absolutely. And I 100% agree. We need to rip Huawei out and have a strong supply chain to ensure this doesn't happen again. So I think that some of the great benefits of Open RAN is the competition. 127 players in the ecosystem is going to help bring prices down. We're also moving to virtualization and software-defined networks, which is going to shrink our footprint and keep things in check. I think bringing AI into the ecosystem is going to help with spectrum efficiency. After you have your radio equipment in place, energy is the next largest cost that the carriers face. So if you're able to do sensing capabilities, will also help bring down costs. And then just innovation. It's going to allow for updates to occur much easier and much simpler, so you don't have to wait for the next 10-year life cycle to occur. So I think there's a lot of excitement, and it's well-deserved.
Thank you. And Madam Chairman, I know I'm out of time, but I may want to submit some additional questions for the record, particularly with regard to Open RAN and concerns that rip and replace causes rationing the remaining parts that they need to repair equipment. And as I said, we're only one bad snowstorm away from the network going down. Hey, thank you all. This has been a wonderful panel. Appreciate you all. Thanks, Madam
Senator
Chairman.
Lummis, do you have a number associated with your region on rip and replace? Do you know?
Yes. These three brown states, the unreimbursed costs are greater than $200 million. Now, on the more orange states, the more vibrant orange, it's between 100 million and 200 million. And there's a number of those as well. And then those that are the more pastel orange, between 10 million and 100 million. So I think it's, about $3 billion to fund the whole shebang. And everybody they were required to rip it out and to not fund the replacement for these small rural providers just puts them out of business.
Well, how does this affect your technology development? You know, part of Chips in Science with the EPSCoR legislation was trying to unfold more places because you can't just do all the technology in very expensive places. So we want to unfold more technology. So how does that affect your ability to attract some of these technology companies with your additional EPSCoR funding?
Yeah, as you can imagine, it's absolutely huge. Now, we have dark fiber that was put across southern Wyoming, kind of along the I-80 corridor some years ago. Some of it is still dark simply because the technology needs to be built to utilize that capability. But again, without rip and replace, we're struggling to provide the important components of a fully integrated system. I want to add one more thing since you've been so kind to ask this question. In Cheyenne, there's kind of a lead development of standards in the architecture. It's an really promising innovation that can help lower costs for deploying wireless networks. And it's Open RAN Center for Integration and Deployment But the problem is many of these networks were built with Huawei and ZTE equipment using legacy radio access network architectures. So providers in my state have been unable to replace their Huawei and ZTE equipment because of the delays in funding RIP and replace. So now they're rationing the remaining parts they need to repair their equipment, and they tell me that it's just constantly at risk. It's what we used to call, you baling wire things together, and it's really problematic. Thanks for asking.
Well, thank you. I don't know if Ms. Rinaldo, you want to add anything? We are waiting for a couple of colleagues. I mean, I have other questions, but we're waiting for Senator Schmidt, Budd, and Lujan to join us momentarily. So, but did you have a comment on that, on this legacy network? My concern here is that, we're talking about these big issues. I loved the optimization, repositioning by Mr. Johnson, because that is truly what we're talking about. We're talking about how do we optimize. And sure, you can be a top-down government like China and dictate things. It doesn't mean it's the right thing. Clearly, interoperability is the key in us figuring that out and then leading on it in an articulation internationally, also the key. It is challenging to go to various places and explain to them why they might have bought something that is not going to be the standard of the future, because no one is going to let a government backdoor be the standard of the future. It's unfortunate that that has been someone's international policy to try to go and deploy that. But nonetheless, I do think that collaboration is the key, because that's what we have to do to get the implementation of the next generation technology. We have to collaborate. And as you can see, this is a subject where not everybody has wanted to collaborate. So I'm glad we're getting some collaboration this morning. But did you want to say anything about this legacy network from a geographic perspective of what that does to put people behind? Because I think that's really what my two colleagues from the Central West were describing. And I think of them as two powerhouses. We have some investors from our state that are trying to build next generation modular reactors in Wyoming, and obviously Boulder is already an epicenter of next generation energy technology. What does that do to put a region behind if they're sitting there with a legacy technology squarely not dealt with?
Yeah, so I would say I worked at the House Intelligence Committee for the authors of the Huawei report. We've been studying this since 2012. And it just confounds me that it's taking this long to see movement in this space. But it just shows how important it is for government to collaborate with industry and to be able to pass that information. My old boss, the one that wrote the report, said he had his first briefing and realized that this needed to get out in the public sector. Hence, they wrote the classified and the unclassified. Through Open RAN, I would say that there's been a lot of change. There has been a lot of information sharing to the public sector since then, so we need to make sure that continues going forward. To collaborate, we are all in this together. So again, I think
But how far does it put a region behind if it still is one of these regions that has a legacy problem? I mean, aren't people just going to say, I'm going to go somewhere else? And here we are trying to expand more development in more places. There is a lot of innovation to take place in the United States of America. And I personally believe you got to have a few things like airports, but you certainly also have to have networks that are free of any kind of government backdoors.
Yeah, absolutely. And right, connectivity is the base of the entire foundation of our economic ecosystem. If we can't get that right, then we struggle having other things fall in place, like the airports, our transportation networks. So it's critical that we do this, we do it right.
So do you think people are looking at those regions now and raising questions?
Yes, absolutely.
Interesting. Okay. Senator Lujan.
Thank you, Chair Cantwell, and thank you for convening this important hearing today. As we know, Congress faces many challenges in telecom, and I'm worried that we don't have the tools needed to face all the challenges in front of us. The House just sent the Senate legislation to address foreign ownership and interference in social media. Section 230 and its liability waiver are under intense scrutiny. Our communications networks and online platforms remain vulnerable to nearly daily privacy violations. The Universal Service Fund is facing unprecedented legal challenges. And at the end of April, the Affordable Connectivity Program will run out of money. The Historic Chips and Science Act remains underfunded. Wireless providers face a mandate to remove Chinese manufactured equipment from cell towers and replace it with secure, trusted hardware. And Congress has so far failed to agree on national spectrum policy. One common factor of all of these, besides that they all fall under the jurisdiction of this committee and the Communications Subcommittee, one common factor is these are all highly technical problems. I'm worried that the legislative branch underinvests in the tools and institutions that we need to address these challenges. Congress and the Senate and this committee have a duty to explore the evidence and establish facts. So I'm grateful that this committee and our chair are exercising its jurisdiction to explore this complex problem. But for over a year, we have continued to disagree on the facts. When it comes to certain spectrum bands, NTIA and the FCC often say one thing, and other agencies or staff within the agency come to the Hill and say something else. Debate is essential, but different federal agencies even disagree on what is technically feasible. It's simply unacceptable. So to the panel, my question is this, yes or no? Should Congress pass legislation that improves interagency coordination such that the executive branch has a unified voice when it comes to spectrum policy? Mr. Johnson?
Absolutely, Senator, and not to, there's, you can't be a Pollyanna. There will always be turf wars. There will always be disagreements. But if we're not able to come to a unified position, then the United States will fall behind, specifically China. And that if we do that, the future is China's. So it starts with having a unified U.S. position. We can do this. We've done it before. Need to do it again.
Sounds like a resounding yes. Ms. Rinaldo?
Yes, absolutely, and I would love to work with you on that.
Dr. Gosh?
Yes, absolutely. Fact-based is what we should be going after.
Appreciate it. Ms. Brown?
Yes, we absolutely need a transparent process where all stakeholder voices get heard. And more than that, even more than one decision, we need finality in that decision, as we've seen before. Thank you.
Dr. Roth?
Yes, Senator. And my understanding is actually under current law, NTIA actually has this responsibility, and somehow anything you can do to reinforce that so that the administration speaks with one voice and not multiple voices.
Appreciate that. Dr. Roth, in your testimony, you stated that the United States was unquestionably at the forefront of commercial spectrum policy. In 1993, Congress gave the FCC authority to auction spectrum. Other countries emulated us, establishing independent regulatory agencies, allowing unlicensed devices, commencing spectrum auctions, and promoting competition in wireless services. In your history as a congressional staffer, a former FCC commissioner, and in your work and research since then, has spectrum ever been a partisan issue?
No, Senator, it hasn't been, and it never should be.
I agree with that, and we can retake our leadership position. To do so, we must lead the world in developing the next generation of not only spectrum technology, but spectrum policy. So I'm hopeful that Congress can find agreement in getting the job done here. Dr. Gosh, I believe the United States can lead the world in developing technology and policy for dynamic spectrum sharing. In my subcommittee hearing last Congress, we focused on the lessons learned from the CBRS band. Now, Dr. Gosh, as you said in your testimony, CBRS demonstrated conclusively that spectrum can be shared successfully between mission-critical applications, such as Navy radar, and commercial applications. Should the federal government not only enact policy, but also invest resources in the development of dynamic spectrum policy?
Absolutely, yes. And I think when we are talking about dynamic spectrum sharing, all systems that are going to be sharing should be designed from day one to operate robustly in a shared spectrum environment. So that includes both federal systems as well as commercial systems.
I appreciate that. And Madam Chair, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit into the record a letter signed by 25 organizations that are writing to renew the Federal Communications Commission's auction authority and use $7 billion of the projected revenue to fund the Affordable Connectivity Program.
Without objection, and thank you
yield back.
so
Thank
much. Thank you so much, Senator Lujan, for your leadership here and for your hearings and sharing various focuses on this issue to bring more light into how we can collaborate. Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Over the last 3 years, the U.S. has ceded leadership both domestically and internationally as relates to spectrum management and 5G innovation. The responsibility for this deviation from America's supremacy almost exclusively lies at the feet of the current president and this administration for the lack of focused attention or direction on these critical issues. We've seen almost zero action from the Biden White House in heading off China, whether it's in rip and replace and addressing the presence of Chinese telecom companies such as Huawei and ZTE in our networks, freeing up more spectrum for commercial use, or asserting leadership abroad in international forums like the World Radio Conference or Spectrum Standards. The list goes on and on and on. But what is clear is this administration's effort to address the China threat and assert U.S. spectrum leadership has fallen flat on its face. Instead, this White House has prioritized injecting woke politics into our nation's telecommunications policies. Some examples include the Commerce Department coercing internet providers to combat climate change or prioritizing hiring past criminals as a condition for federal broadband program funding. Additionally, we've seen them engage in government power grab antics like internet rate regulation and combating so-called digital discrimination practices. None of these actions address the urgent and critical issues of network security, spectrum leadership, and our strategic competition with China. This current administration's initiatives stand in stark contrast with the proactive leadership of President Trump. Under the Trump administration, the FCC released record amounts of spectrum for licensed 5G use and thousands of megahertz for unlicensed use. Thanks to the Trump administration, America went from standing still to leading the globe in 5G innovation. Additionally, President Trump took the China threat head-on by working with Congress to pass the Secure and Trusted Networks Act, taking important actions to protect our networks from Huawei and ZTE, and asserting U.S. leadership in international forums to secure 5G networks. Late last year, President Biden released his long-awaited national spectrum strategy. While many were expecting a strategy that lays out a timeline for making specific spectrum bands available for a variety of licensed, shared, or unlicensed commercial use, Biden's strategy did none of that. Instead, the current administration's strategy, and I use that term loosely, failed to make a single megahertz or spectrum available. Let's be clear, this failure of strategy by the Biden administration puts our nation further behind the 8 ball as China continues to push forward with 5G innovation. There are plenty of proposals offered here in Congress, including my Launch Communications Act, to help modernize our nation's spectrum policies and strengthen Americans' efforts domestically, abroad, and in space. While many will differ over how to best position our nation's spectrum strategy, it's important that any approach maximizes America's innovation and promotes the diverse supplier base of our internet ecosystem. However, thanks to the Biden administration, our nation has a strategy of stagnation at a time when technological leadership is more crucial than ever. America is not just falling behind, it's faltering as a direct consequence of this administration's tactics while China is nearing the final turn of the race on 5G. We cannot allow that to happen, and I remain committed to working with members of this committee to ensure our nation does not fall behind. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Schmidt. I think that concludes our hearing for today, at least for members who are planning on making it over. So I want to thank again our witnesses for this illumination about really how much you actually agree on moving forward on some policies and how much these efforts to optimize and integrate and collaborate mean something for our future. So hopefully we can demonstrate that and do that. You will have, senators will have till the end of business on Thursday, April 4th to submit questions for the record. And we'll have to the end of business on April 18th to submit your responses for our committee record. So thank you again, and we're adjourned.